listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the case that has gripped the world.
How did a beef Wellington lunch lead to one of Australia's biggest murder trials?
An Australian woman accused of murdering 3 relatives and attempting to kill a 4th.
Erin Patterson has been found guilty.
Guilty.
Mushroom killer.
Guilty on all counts.
The trial that grabbed the world's attention.
A 12-person jury convicted Patterson.
Many people across the country, indeed the world, thought that she was guilty of these crimes.
Killed her estranged husband's parents and his aunt and hospitalized his uncle.
Erin Patterson made out it was all a terrible accident.
I just can't believe it.
But the jury just didn't believe her.
After a 10-week trial that captivated Australia and the world, a jury has decided she poisoned them on purpose.
Erin Patterson is now Australia's worst female serial killer. The 50-year-old today found guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder over a deadly mushroom meal. We'll unpack the verdict and what happens now in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Monday, the 7th of July. The Northern Territory coroner has handed down her long-awaited findings into the police shooting death of a 19-year-old Indigenous man in 2019. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are advised that this story contains the name of an Indigenous person who has died. Kamanjayi Walker was fatally shot by then Northern Territory police officer Zachary Rolfe during an attempted arrest in a remote community around 300 kilometres northwest of Alice Springs. Here is coroner Elizabeth Armitage handing down her findings.
I found that Mr. Rolfe was racist and that he worked in and was the beneficiary of an organisation with hallmarks of institutional racism.
The coroner also made 32 recommendations, including investigating the Northern Territory Police's recruitment processes and also strengthening its anti-racism strategy. And the FBI and US President Donald Trump's Department of Justice have released a bombshell report into Jeffrey Epstein. They have concluded the convicted sex offender did not keep a client list or blackmail prominent people. The review also concluding there's no evidence to prove the 66-year-old who was found dead in his jail cell in 2019 was murdered. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Associate Professor and Criminologist Xanthé Mallett on today's bombshell guilty verdict in the mushroom murder trial. Erin Patterson was found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder after meticulously planning a deadly beef Wellington dish that killed her in-laws, her ex-husband's aunt, and almost killed another. Now everyone is asking why. Xanthé, thanks so much for joining us. As we mentioned, Erin Patterson has been guilty on all 4 charges. What was your reaction?
Well, I've been in this game for too long to really bet on what way a jury is going to go. I mean, it was a very long trial. We had a lot of witnesses, a lot of evidence to consider. 7 days wasn't actually that long for the jury to take, I think, given the seriousness of the charges against Erin Patterson, the 3 alleged murder, and now she's found guilty, and the attempted. And I think what was probably weighing very heavily on the jury was that if they found her not guilty, there was no alternative charge. If she was found not guilty, she walked. And when you're weighing up 3 deceased people and, answering to their families, as well as Ian Wilkinson, who obviously lost his wife, I think the jury had an incredibly difficult decision to make.
In regards to reasonable doubt, there was ongoing speculation about she may have been found not guilty, considering what was presented in court by the prosecution. Do you think this wasn't a surprise? It wasn't a matter of why Erin has done it. It's if she did. And the jury has said, yes, she did murder 3 people and she tried to murder another one.
Yeah, reasonable doubt is always a difficult term. It doesn't really have a formal definition. It's just like, does anyone have literally reasonable doubt that there could be an alternative explanation? The alternative put forward by the defence was that this was a an awful foraging accident and it was just a tragedy, and that there was no intent. And it always centered around the prosecution demonstrating to the satisfaction of the jury beyond a reasonable doubt, the legal standard, that it was intentful. And that goes back to the kind of issues with premeditation as indicated by the lies that were told, getting them into the lunch under false pretenses. Obviously, the jury probably believed Ian Wilkinson that she fed them a different colour plate to the plate that she ate on. The desiccator, the fact that she denied foraging to start with. So whilst lies didn't add up to guilt, they obviously would have had an impact on the jury because it was difficult, I imagine, to believe what she was telling them about being not guilty when they had this litany of lies that were demonstrated in court.
We mentioned before, we now know, according to this jury, that Erin Patterson did do it. She is guilty. Many people are now asking why. You've studied the psychology of a lot of killers beforehand. What are your thoughts about this?
It's going to be really difficult in this case. And I think we have to still be cautious because I am expecting her legal team to ask for an appeal. Whether that will be granted or not depends on the grounds that they put forward. My understanding is she hasn't been assessed psychiatrically or psychologically yet. She may be before sentencing. That's going to be the next stage in this process. So I'd be loath to really speak to her psychology at the moment because she is still maintaining, as far as I'm aware, that she is not guilty. There will potentially be an appeal. So without more information, without the assessment, it would be very difficult to comment on her particularly, but ultimately the prosecution demonstrated there were certainly, issues within the family. There were stressors that appear to have led to this awful, awful outcome.
Xanthé, considering today's verdict, guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder, Erin is now one of Australia's worst mass murderers.
Well, I'm always reluctant to use weighted terminology like worst. I mean, we heard that in relation to Kathleen Folbig, worst female serial killer, because to me, that weights some people's deaths over others as more serious. Ultimately, everyone who's murdered, that's an awful loss and it's unnecessary and it's a tragedy. So I'm kind of cautious against using that kind of phrase. However, she is, and I've been thinking about this, she is the only female mass murderer in recent Australian criminal history that I can think of. So certainly she is unusual. And I think that's one of the reasons it's garnered such huge international attention. I was in the UK last week. I was doing interviews over there. I did a French magazine yesterday. In Europe, they're talking about it. In the States, they're talking about it. And I think that's part of the reason a female accused of such serious crimes, mass murder, has really struck a chord, not just in Australia, but across the world.
Xanthé, and as we know, Ian Wilkinson was the only one of those guests to actually survive that deadly mushroom lunch. How critical do you think his evidence was in the conviction of Erin?
Yeah, I think his testimony would have been really influential on the jury because he came across as so believable, so down to earth, so together. Given what he'd lost and what he'd been through physically and emotionally, I think he presented really well. And his evidence of the different colour plates, that she ate from a different colour plate. Now, I know that she denied that, but you would have to wonder why he would lie. What a strange lie to come up with. And given she had clearly lied about so many other things, why would the jury believe her over him? And it's just a strange thing to come up with, isn't it? Oh, she ate off a different colour plate. You just have to wonder, why would they not believe him? He came across as very honest. And so I think, his testimony was probably really central to this outcome.
And you talk there about the lies, Xanthé. I think that's what was really convincing or compelling. The decision to put Erin on the stand to give evidence. It seemed to be lie after lie after lie. And then one may argue, if she was lying about this, was she lying about everything else?
Yeah, but I think the judge made a really good point, though, that a liar does not make a murderer. And this reminds me of the case of Kelly Lane. Kelly Lane, who was accused of murdering Tegan Lane, who's still in prison for Tegan's murder. I don't believe that she killed Tegan, but Kelly told lies. Kelly told a whole litany of lies to cover up different parts of her life she wanted to keep secret, but that never made her a murderer. And I think the judge made a really good point there because lying does not equate to murder. However, you have to wonder, what you could have believed that she said, given that in essence, nothing that she was saying agreed with any of the other witnesses or the evidence. Everybody else was wrong. Everybody else was lying. And I think ultimately that just did not convince the jury.
Xanthé, the prosecution argued that this was deliberate, there was intent, and that Erin had planned this meal and had got the poisonous mushrooms to carry out these murders and an attempted murder. The defence always argued that it was an accident. Pretty compelling verdict, though, from the jury.
Well, it was either going to go all one way or all the other way. There was no middle ground in this case. It wasn't going to be the case that Erin Patterson was found guilty of some charges and not guilty of other charges, because obviously that event happened in one. It was a mass murder, as now found by the jury, and that attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson. So yes, it was always going to be one way or the other. But, we were all guessing. We were all waiting on tender hooks, because the prosecution demonstrating intent, that was always very difficult. There's the only person who actually knows whether she did this intentfully is obviously Erin Patterson. Now, it was up to the defence to show that that wasn't intentful and the prosecution to show that it was. But it's a kind of intangible concept, isn't it? Intent. And it was really the evidence around that supported or refuted their arguments. And ultimately, the jury have decided that there was intent and she is, in fact, guilty of murder and attempted murder.
Xanthé, you mentioned earlier that Erin's team may launch an appeal. We don't know whether that will be granted or not. She is to be sentenced at another date at this stage. What sentence do you think Erin could face, considering she has been found guilty of 3 murders and the attempted murder of another person?
Well, I can't imagine it would be anything other than life. I don't know whether that will be a full life term without the possibility of parole. It really depends on what the judge in his sentencing. And people always underestimate how complex sentencing is. The judge will have to go through a lot of evidence separate, to what is already considered. She may well be assessed psychologically or psychiatrically to see whether there's anything that needs to be considered in that sense. So there'll be what we class as potentially mitigating factors, which reduce the seriousness and the lengths of sentence, against factors that will increase it, aggravating factors. But given we're talking murder, the most serious offence that there is, I would expect life sentences for that offence.
Do you think we'll ever know why Erin did this?
I'm not sure we ever will, to be honest. I mean, we have to, again, remember that Erin Patterson is maintaining, as far as I'm aware, that she is not guilty. So I don't think she's going to tell us. So it's a lot of supposition at this stage. And I think that what we need to remember fundamentally for me is that 3 people have died. Ian Wilkinson survived. Simon Patterson will have been very significantly affected by this. He's lost family members, and also the Patterson children. And so I've seen a lot of memes, this has almost become kind of a joke or like a dark comedy. And I would just remind people that this is a family that has been so deeply, deeply traumatized that that's who we really need to be thinking about now, and respecting their privacy, because it's going to take them a long time to process what has happened and to adjust and move forward. And I really feel for them.
Very well said, Xanthé. We really appreciate your time on a very busy day. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was Associate Professor and Criminologist Xanthé Mallett from the Central Queensland University. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.